Cade walked through the crowded market of the Arthon station, his heavy boots echoing on the metal floor. The station was a swirl of colors, smells, and noises, traders shouting, exotic creatures screeching, and the hum of spaceships docking above. Cade had been to many markets across the galaxy, but this one was different. Here, rare and unusual beings were traded openly. He was a warrior, a man who had faced dangers most people could not imagine. Battles, ambushes, and survival on hostile planets had taught him to trust only his own skills. That was why he usually stayed alone. But today, something drew him through the maze of stalls. At the far end of the market, a small, quiet stall caught his eye. Unlike the other traders who shouted and waved, this one was calm. Behind the stall, a tall, thin alien woman sat quietly. Her skin was pale green, her eyes large and luminous, and her hands delicate but steady. There was a sadness in her gaze, a quiet dignity that set her apart from the other beings on display. Cade stepped closer, and the trader noticed him. "Ah, a human warrior," the alien man said with a sly smile. "Perhaps you are interested in this one?" Cade looked at the woman again. "Who is she?" he asked. "She is a princess," the trader replied. "Lyra of the Navari. She has limitations." His eyes flicked toward Cade meaningfully. "She cannot hear, you see. It is why she is here, offered at a lower price than her station would normally command." Cade raised an eyebrow. "Deaf?" "Yes," the trader said. "She cannot respond to speech, but she is strong, intelligent, though most do not see it. That is why she is available." Cade studied her. She did not flinch at the noise of the market, did not react to the chaos. But in her eyes he saw a quiet alertness, a sharpness most would not notice. She was not fragile, she was not weak. Something stirred in Cade. He did not care about the rumors, about her limitations, or about the trader's warnings. He cared about her presence. There was a strength in her and a loneliness he recognized. "How much?" Cade asked. The trader smirked. "For you, warrior, 1,000 credits. A bargain considering her status." Cade reached into his pouch, counting the credits quickly. "Done." The trader's smile widened. "Very well, she is yours. Remember, she cannot hear you. Speak if you wish, but she will not respond." Lyra's eyes met Cade's. She did not speak. She did not move. But she did not look afraid either. Her gaze held something. Curiosity, maybe, or understanding. Cade did not notice it at first. He led her away from the market, through the winding corridors of the station, to his small ship waiting at the docking bay. The journey was quiet. Cade talked to her as he always talked, to himself, to companions he had lost, to no one at all. He spoke of his battles, of the planets he had survived, of the loneliness that clung to him like a shadow. Lyra sat quietly beside him, her hands folded, listening. Cade assumed she could not hear. "You know," Cade said, leaning against the wall, "I've fought aliens twice my size. I've survived storms on planets where nothing lives. But sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. Life, I mean. Fighting. Surviving alone." Lyra's fingers twitched slightly. Cade did not notice. He continued. "Most people think warriors are brave because they fight, but really it's because we are alone. Alone in our choices, in our losses, in our nights." Lyra's eyes glimmered in the dim light. She had heard everything, every word, every confession, and yet she said nothing. Cade sighed and leaned back in his seat. The ship lifted off, leaving the bustling station behind. Cade looked out the viewport at the stars stretching endlessly ahead. He had never planned to bring anyone into his life. It was safer that way. Fewer attachments, fewer losses. And yet, here she was, sitting quietly beside him. For days, the journey passed in silence. Cade continued to speak, not expecting answers. He told her about the time he had survived a sandstorm on Kralon 5, how he had fought a pack of predators that could tear a man apart in seconds. He shared stories of alliances that had betrayed him, of friends lost in cosmic wars, of planets he had protected and destroyed. Lyra listened. She understood every word. She could not respond, but she could think, plan, and observe. And with every story, every word, her admiration for this human warrior grew. One night, Cade sat on the deck of the ship, sharpening his blade under the dim lights. "I don't know why I bought you," he said softly, "but maybe it was fate. Maybe I just saw someone who understands without even trying to. Maybe I just wanted company. And maybe," he paused, looking at her without realizing it, "maybe I just didn't want to be alone anymore." Lyra's hand moved slightly, almost imperceptibly. Cade did not see it. The silence stretched. The ship hummed gently through space, and though Cade thought she was unaware, Lyra was listening. She had understood more than he knew. Every doubt, every confession, every lonely thought, she had heard it all. When they finally approached the remote outpost where Cade had chosen to settle, the warrior began preparing a small living area. He assumed she would need time to adjust. He thought of her as fragile, limited by her supposed inability to hear. But Lyra had other plans. She moved quietly, learning the layout of the ship, memorizing every corner, every tool, every weapon. She watched Cade's habits carefully, anticipating his needs before he even voiced them. The next morning, Cade was surprised to find a cup of water waiting for him as he emerged from his quarters. "I didn't know you could—" He stopped mid-sentence, realizing she had done it before he even asked. He blinked. Strange. Lyra simply looked at him. Her eyes said more than words could. She had listened. She had understood, and though she could not speak aloud yet, she was not helpless. Cade's mind, for the first time in years, felt unsettled. He had faced countless enemies, outsmarted alien generals, and survived dangers that would terrify most humans. But this quiet, watchful companion who had been considered powerless by the galaxy was something he could not predict. He shook his head. "Well, I guess we'll see how this works," he said, half to himself, half to her. Lyra's eyes sparkled with a hint of amusement, though Cade did not notice. She had heard every word, every thought he had shared, and for the first time in her life she felt seen. Not as a silent princess, not as an object to be bought, but as someone capable, aware, and alive. The first day on the outpost passed quietly. Cade worked on his weapons, maintaining his ship, preparing for the missions he often undertook. Lyra followed, observing, helping silently when she could. And though Cade assumed she was simply following orders or mimicking behavior, Lyra was learning, planning, and thinking ahead. As the twin suns of the planet dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Cade sat outside, staring at the stars. "I don't know if I can do this. Share my life with someone," he muttered. "But I suppose we'll try." Lyra sat beside him, silent, watching him carefully. She did not speak, but her presence was comforting. She had heard everything he said, understood everything he felt, and for the first time, she hoped that maybe, just maybe, this lonely warrior was someone she could trust. And so, the journey of a lonely warrior and a silent alien princess began, not with words, but with understanding. One thought at a time, one shared moment at a time, they would discover that even in a galaxy full of noise, silence could be powerful, and even in solitude, connection could grow. Little did Cade know, the princess he thought could not hear was listening to everything. And when the truth came to light, it would change both their lives forever. The days on the remote outpost passed quietly, yet unease settled in Cade's mind. He had expected silence, routine, and solitude with Lyra. That was why he had chosen this outpost, a place far from the prying eyes of the galaxy. But something about Lyra unsettled him. She moved quietly, with precision, as if she already knew what he would do next. One morning, Cade was repairing a small hover drone near the edge of the outpost. Lyra watched him from a short distance, her hands folded in front of her. He muttered under his breath, "I've always hated these things. always breaking when you need them most. Without turning, he added, "But no one cares about what I think anyway, right? Just another soldier no one remembers." Cade paused for a moment, thinking he had spoken to himself. Then he noticed Lyra's eyes. A faint glimmer reflected in them, as if she understood more than she should. He shook his head and returned to his work, ignoring the thought. Over the next few days, Cade began to notice other strange things. She anticipated his movements, handing him tools before he asked. She moved silently, almost unnaturally, adjusting systems he hadn't even planned to touch yet. At first, he assumed it was luck or instinct, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. One evening, after a long day of maintenance, Cade sat outside under the twin moons. "You know," he said, staring at the pale light reflecting on the dusty plains, "I didn't want anyone here. I've always worked alone, but having someone to share the quiet with, it isn't so bad." Lyra remained still, watching him. He continued speaking, unaware that she was listening to every word. "I've made mistakes," Cade admitted. "Fought battles I shouldn't have, lost people I cared about, and I thought I could handle it all, alone. I thought I had to. But now, I don't know." He shook his head. "Maybe I'm too old for this, too set in my ways." That night, Cade went to sleep with a sense of unease. Lyra sat silently thinking. She had heard every word, every doubt, every confession. Her mind raced. She had never thought humans could speak so openly, so honestly. And now she realized this warrior, strong, capable, feared by many, was vulnerable in ways no one saw. The next morning, Cade woke to find a small meal waiting for him outside his quarters. It was arranged neatly, perfectly balanced, and warm. Cade blinked. "How?" he muttered. "She wasn't told how to do this. She doesn't even hear me, right?" Lyra approached, carrying another tray. She did not speak, only looked at him expectantly. Cade frowned, suspicion growing. He decided to test her. "Lyra," he said slowly, pointing to the tray, "if you understand me, move the tray to the left." To his shock, she did it instantly, with no hesitation. Cade stepped back, heart racing. "Wait, what? How did you—" Lyra simply watched him, her eyes calm, her lips sealed. Cade's mind spun. Could she really hear him? Or was it some strange intuition, some alien ability he had never seen before? Determined to find out, he set up a small experiment. Over the next few days, he whispered things to her, questions, commands, even secrets he would not normally share. And each time she responded in subtle ways that showed understanding. A tilt of her head, the way she placed a tool, the way she anticipated his movements. It all confirmed what he feared and hoped. Lyra could hear him. Cade's initial reaction was confusion, then frustration, then a strange sort of admiration. She had kept this secret from him. For days, she had listened, understood, and chosen when and how to respond. And she had never once tried to deceive him. One afternoon, Cade and Lyra were exploring the rocky terrain surrounding the outpost. Cade paused at a steep incline, breathing heavily from the climb. "I don't usually trust anyone," he muttered. "Too many have betrayed me. Too many left me to die." He looked down at her. "But I don't think I could have survived this long without someone, even if I didn't know it at the time." Lyra's hand hovered near the edge of her cloak. Then she carefully placed it on a rock, ready to assist him if needed. Cade caught the movement and froze. Her timing was perfect. You knew I was about to slip," he said, astonished. She did not speak, but Cade realized she had heard him, understood the danger, and acted without waiting for orders. A wave of respect and awe washed over him. That evening, Cade sat outside, sharpening his sword under the dim light of the moons. "You're clever," he said quietly. "I don't know why you didn't tell me. Most people would brag. Most people would, I don't know, show off. But you waited. You watched. You learned." Lyra remained silent, her eyes focused on the glowing horizon. Cade sighed. "I guess I can respect that. You're not just a princess, you're more than I expected." For the first time, Lyra allowed a faint smile to touch her lips. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Cade noticed. His heart skipped a beat. He realized, perhaps for the first time in his life, that someone was truly seeing him, not just as a warrior, not just as a survivor, but as a person. The days continued like this. Cade tested her occasionally, whispering small secrets or commands. Lyra's responses were perfect every time. She never interrupted, never corrected him, never made him feel foolish. She had heard everything, his doubts, his fears, his loneliness, and she remained patient, waiting for the moment he could handle the truth. Then came the night that changed everything. Cade had returned from a scouting mission, tired and bruised from a skirmish with a small band of marauders. He collapsed on a bench outside the outpost, muttering to himself, "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this, surviving alone, fighting alone, losing everyone." Lyra approached quietly, carrying a small blanket. Without speaking, she draped it over him. Cade froze, realizing the care in her actions. "Wait, how did you—" Her hand rested gently on his shoulder. He flinched slightly, but not in fear, more in awe. The realization hit him fully. She had heard every word he had spoken since the moment he bought her. Every thought, every confession, every doubt. She had understood him. Cade's mind raced. "All this time, you've been listening. You heard everything I said." Lyra finally responded in the only way she had until now. She wrote a single message on a small slate she carried with her. In neat, precise letters were the words, "I hear everything." Cade stared at it, disbelief and respect mingling in his expression. He had assumed she was deaf, incapable of understanding the human language. And yet here she was, silent, patient, intelligent, and aware. She had listened to him, learned from him, and chosen her moment to reveal the truth. He swallowed hard. You could have told me any time." Lyra shook her head slightly. She had wanted him to speak freely, to share his thoughts without fear. She had wanted to know him, understand him before revealing her own strength. Cade felt a mixture of embarrassment and admiration. I underestimated you," he admitted. "Completely." Lyra's faint smile returned, and this time Cade noticed it fully. There was intelligence in her eyes, humor, and something deeper, trust. For the first time, he felt a bond forming that was not built on ownership or obligation, but on understanding. That night, Cade slept with a different feeling than usual. He had faced countless enemies, survived impossible missions, and endured heartbreak and betrayal. But never had he encountered someone who could see through him so completely, someone who understood him without a single spoken word. And Lyra, for her part, felt hope for the first time in her life. She had been bought, yes, but in Cade she saw honesty, strength, and perhaps a future where she could be more than her past. She had heard everything, and she had chosen to stay. The first steps of trust and understanding had been taken, and both of them sensed that their journey together was only beginning. The desert winds whipped around the outpost as Cade led Lyra across the rocky terrain. He had decided that if she was going to live with him, she needed to understand survival, not just sit quietly as a passive companion. The outpost was isolated, far from trade routes and friendly settlements, and the dangers of the surrounding desert were real. Predators lurked among the jagged rocks, and storms could rise without warning. Cade glanced at Lyra. "Keep your eyes open," he said. "The desert doesn't forgive mistakes. Stay close." Lyra followed silently, but Cade noticed her posture was alert, her head turning at every subtle sound. She moved with grace and precision, like a shadow. He assumed she was watching him and learning from his movements, unaware that she had already memorized much of his behavior. Hours passed as they climbed a steep ridge. Cade stopped to rest, crouching behind a boulder to catch his breath. He watched the horizon, noting the movement of distant sand clouds. "Most people wouldn't survive this far from the outpost," he said aloud. "But if you understand what I'm doing, maybe you'll learn something." Lyra did more than learn. When a sudden rock slide sent a boulder tumbling near Cade's feet, she reacted instantly, grabbing his arm and pulling him out of the way. Cade's eyes widened. "How?" he muttered. Lyra only pointed toward the boulder, then nodded toward a safer path. Cade realized that she had anticipated the danger, moved with him before he even acted. He began to feel a mixture of admiration and disbelief. This was no ordinary princess. Later, as they set up a temporary shelter in the rocks, Cade spoke quietly. "You know, most people would have panicked back there, would have screamed or frozen. But you just reacted. Calm, precise, like you've done this before." Lyra tilted her head slightly, watching him carefully. She had indeed learned from observation, but more importantly, she had understood every warning, every hint he had ever given, every word he thought she couldn't hear. The night was cold, the wind cutting across the rocks. Cade built a small fire and they sat together in silence. Cade had always been used to being alone, yet now he felt an odd sense of companionship. "I never thought I'd have someone like you here," he admitted. "Someone who doesn't just survive but notices, understands. Most people would never see what I see." Lyra's eyes reflected the firelight. She did not speak, but the calm strength in her presence was enough. The next day, Cade decided it was time to test her further. He handed her a small blaster, explaining its parts and how to use it. "Hold it like this," he instructed, demonstrating. "Aim for the center of mass. Fire only when you're sure. Don't waste energy or ammo." Lyra watched carefully. Within minutes, she had picked it up, her movements precise and steady. Cade fired a few test shots at a distant rock target. To his shock, Lyra matched him shot for shot. Her aim was perfect, her stance flawless. "How?" Cade whispered, lowering his weapon. He realized she was not simply copying him. She was understanding, calculating, thinking ahead. She had learned not only from observation, but from listening, from analyzing every word he had spoken since the day he bought her. The realization hit him fully. Lyra had been hiding her abilities, her intelligence, her awareness, and she had done it not to deceive him, but to watch, to understand, to see if he could accept her as more than just a silent prize. For the first time, Cade felt something unfamiliar: humility. He had faced countless enemies and survived impossible battles, but here was a being thought to be powerless by the galaxy who could outthink him, anticipate him, and protect him in ways no human could. Later that afternoon, while scouting a nearby canyon, Cade slipped on loose rocks and fell, narrowly avoiding a jagged cliff edge. Lyra's reaction was instantaneous. She caught him, steadying his weight, and guided him back to safety. Cade stared at her, catching his breath. "You saved me. Again." She nodded once, her expression calm but serious. Cade's mind raced. Every subtle movement, every instinct she displayed, it was clear now that she had been listening and understanding from the beginning. That evening, as they returned to the outpost, Cade spoke in a low, contemplative voice. "I thought I was alone. I thought I had to survive by myself because no one else could, or would, help me. But you've changed that. You've shown me something I didn't expect." Lyra sat beside him, her eyes bright under the starlight. For the first time, she allowed herself a small, visible smile. Cade noticed it fully this time. It was not arrogance, not pride. It was recognition, trust, and perhaps a hint of affection. The days passed, and Cade continued to teach her survival skills. Lyra learned quickly, her understanding growing with every lesson. She anticipated his instructions, executed them perfectly, and even offered solutions he hadn't considered. Cade could not help but feel a sense of awe. One day, while repairing the outpost's energy shields, Cade muttered, frustrated, "I can't fix this. It's too complex. Too many faulty circuits. Most people would give up." Lyra moved beside him, examining the circuits. With precise movements, she adjusted a few components, rerouted energy flow, and stabilized the system. Cade stared at her handiwork. You fixed it." without me telling you exactly what to do. Lyra's eyes met his. She had heard his frustration, understood the problem, and acted. Cade felt a mixture of astonishment and respect. This silent princess was more capable than most warriors he had trained with. That night, as they sat around the small fire, Cade spoke softly. "I've underestimated you. I thought you were helpless, limited. But you're not. You've been listening, learning, and surviving. Better than I expected." Lyra's gaze softened. She had heard every word he had said since the day he bought her. She had understood his doubts, his loneliness, his fears, and she had chosen not to confront him until he was ready to see her as she truly was. Cade leaned back, staring at the stars. "You're clever, patient, strong, and I think I need to learn from you, not just teach you." Lyra remained silent, yet her presence spoke volumes. She had already begun teaching him in ways he had not realized, through observation, through understanding, through action. The next day, Cade decided to test her further in combat training. He had set up a small obstacle course with simulated enemies. "Move fast," he instructed. "Watch my movements. Anticipate my actions. Don't just react, think ahead." Lyra followed, executing every maneuver perfectly. She anticipated his attacks, avoided traps, and even outmaneuvered him at points. Cade's jaw tightened in awe. "By the stars, you're incredible!" She gave him a small, faint nod, almost imperceptible. It was not a gesture of arrogance, but of quiet confidence. Cade realized that this princess, once considered powerless, was more than a partner. She was an equal, a strategist, a warrior. That night, Cade reflected on the days that had passed. He had come to this outpost seeking solitude, expecting silence and obedience. Instead, he had found understanding, intelligence, and courage beyond measure. Lyra had revealed herself slowly, allowing him to adjust to her abilities and learn to respect her as more than a silent princess. For the first time in years, Cade felt hope, not just for survival, but for connection. He had thought he was alone in the galaxy, but now he realized that trust, partnership, and understanding could exist even in the most unlikely circumstances. Lyra, for her part, felt a quiet satisfaction. She had endured being seen as powerless, underestimated, and sold as a commodity. But now, with Cade, she found someone who would recognize her for what she truly was: intelligent, capable, and strong. And she knew without words that this bond was only beginning. The desert winds howled outside the outpost, but inside a silent partnership had formed. Cade and Lyra, warrior and princess, human and alien, stood together, learning from each other, growing stronger, and preparing for the challenges that the galaxy might send their way. And neither of them realized how deep their understanding had already grown, or how it would soon be tested in ways neither could predict. The twin suns of the desert had barely risen when Cade and Lyra spotted movement on the horizon. Dust clouds rose in the distance, betraying the approach of a raiding party. Cade squinted against the glare, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. "Looks like trouble," he muttered, "and not the friendly kind." Lyra stood beside him, calm and silent, her eyes scanning the approaching figures. Cade realized once again how precise her senses were. Even in the bright glare of the sun, she had already noted the number of attackers, their formation, and the type of weapons they carried. Cade crouched behind a rocky outcrop. "We need a plan. I can take a few of them head-on, but they're too many for me alone." Lyra stepped closer, placing a hand on the ground and pointing toward a narrow canyon path. Cade followed her gesture. She had already considered an ambush point, a place where the raiders' numbers would count for little. You know exactly what to do," Cade said, impressed. "Even I hadn't thought of that." Lyra's eyes glimmered with quiet understanding. She had been listening to his strategies for days, anticipating his movements, and now she was ready to act. As the raiders approached, Cade leapt into action, striking with precision and strength. His sword swung with deadly accuracy, forcing the attackers to split and regroup. Lyra moved beside him, silent and fast, striking with her own weapons. Her movements were fluid, almost artistic, yet lethal. Every motion was calculated, every strike deliberate. Cade realized that she was not merely following him, she was leading in her own way, anticipating his actions and covering his blind spots. Together, they moved as a single unit, human and alien in perfect synchronization. One raider attempted to sneak behind Cade, but Lyra intercepted him effortlessly, disarming him before he could strike. Cade caught his breath, astonished. "By the stars! You're incredible!" Lyra's expression was calm, almost serene. She had heard every word he had spoken in the past weeks and had used that knowledge to complement his fighting style. Cade realized that her silence had been a strength, not a limitation. The battle raged for what felt like hours. Cade and Lyra fought side by side, each saving the other from dangerous strikes, each predicting the other's movements. Slowly, the raiders began to retreat, realizing they were no match for the unusual duo. When the last of the attackers fled into the desert, Cade collapsed onto a rock, breathing heavily. Lyra crouched beside him, scanning the horizon for any remaining threat. Cade looked at her, awe written across his face. "I don't think anyone would survive this fight without you," he admitted. You saved my life more than once today." Lyra tilted her head slightly. She had heard his confession, his admiration, but she remained composed. Cade realized that she understood his words deeply. She understood their meaning, their weight, and their sincerity. As the dust settled, Cade finally allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had always trusted his own skills, his own instincts, and his own strength. But today, he saw that trust alone was not enough. Partnership, understanding, and mutual respect could be even more powerful. That evening, as they tended to their minor wounds and repaired the damage to the outpost, Cade spoke quietly. "I underestimated you," he said. "I thought I was buying someone helpless. I thought, I don't know, that you couldn't be part of this, part of my life. But you've shown me I was wrong, completely wrong." Lyra's eyes met his. She had heard every word, every thought, every hesitation, and yet she remained patient, allowing him to come to his own realization. Cade felt a deep respect for her restraint. "I've always been alone," he continued, his voice soft. "Fought my battles alone, carried my losses alone. But today, I realized something. Alone isn't always better. Maybe it's okay to trust someone, even if it's you." Lyra's faint smile returned, and Cade finally noticed the subtle warmth in her gaze. It was not just recognition, it was acceptance, and perhaps something more. The next days were a test of their growing partnership. Cade trained Lyra further, but now with a new understanding. He spoke openly about strategies, sharing not just techniques but his thoughts, his instincts, and his feelings. Lyra listened, responded with perfect timing, and even suggested adjustments he had not considered. Together they explored the desert, navigating treacherous terrain, fending off small bands of raiders, and surviving sudden sandstorms. Cade began to see her not as a silent companion, but as a true partner, someone whose intelligence, skill, and courage matched his own. One afternoon, as they scaled a jagged cliff to survey the surrounding area, Cade paused to rest. "You know," he said, catching his breath, "I never expected someone like you to understand so quickly, to think, anticipate, even save my life. Most people would have panicked, run, or hidden." Lyra's eyes met his. She had heard every word, every unspoken doubt, every fleeting thought. She had been watching him for days, learning his strengths, noticing his weaknesses, and waiting for the right moment to show him her own abilities. Cade's respect grew with each passing day. He realized that he had misjudged her, not just about her hearing, but about her intelligence, her patience, and her courage. He had thought he was rescuing someone weak, but in truth, she had already been his equal. That night, under the stars, Cade sat beside Lyra, reflecting on the events of the past days. "I've faced countless dangers," he admitted, "but nothing has surprised me like this. You're incredible, not just because of your skill, but because of who you are. Strong, calm, smart. And I think I've been blind to it until now." Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to communicate more openly, not with words, but with presence. She moved closer, her hand resting lightly on his. Cade caught the gesture, understanding its significance without needing words. The bond between them had grown stronger than either had expected. It was forged not in words alone, but in shared danger, shared trust, and mutual respect. Cade had learned to see her not as a silent princess, but as a capable partner. Lyra had learned that humans could be more than lonely warriors. They could be protectors, allies, and perhaps even friends. As the twin moons rose above the desert horizon, Cade felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. For the first time, he realized that his life did not have to be one of solitude. With Lyra, he had found not just an ally, but someone who could understand him fully, someone who could face the dangers of the galaxy by his side. And though the desert winds howled outside the outpost, inside, a partnership had been forged. A warrior and a princess, human and alien, equal in strength, intelligence, and courage. They were ready for whatever challenges the galaxy might throw at them next, knowing that together they could face anything. Little did they know, a new threat was approaching, one that would test their bond, their skills, and their trust in ways they could never have imagined. But for now, under the calm glow of the moons, they rested, knowing that they were no longer alone. The twin suns had barely risen over the horizon when the warning lights on Cade's outpost began to flash. Sensors detected an approaching fleet, large, heavily armed ships descending from orbit. This was no ordinary raiding party. Cade's heart sank as he recognized the insignia, the Droxian Marauders, a notorious group of mercenaries feared across the galaxy. Cade turned to Lyra. "This isn't like the usual attacks," he said quietly. "They've come prepared, heavily armed. They won't leave without a fight." Lyra nodded, her calm presence a sharp contrast to the tension in Cade's voice. She had anticipated the approach of the fleet long before the sensors confirmed it. Her understanding of strategy and tactics had grown sharper each day they had spent together, and now it would be put to the ultimate test. Cade activated the defensive shields while Lyra scanned the terrain for advantages. "We'll need to split their forces," she indicated with subtle hand gestures and points, marking positions Cade had not considered. "Use the canyon as a funnel. Force them into a narrow pass. Limit their numbers." Cade's eyes widened. "Exactly what I was thinking, but you thought of it first. Impressive." Together they prepared the outpost for battle. Cade armed weapons, reinforced barriers, and set traps, while Lyra positioned herself strategically, using her speed and awareness to cover blind spots. Their coordination was flawless. They no longer needed words. Every glance, every movement conveyed intent and strategy. The Droxian ships landed, and soldiers began to pour into the desert. Cade and Lyra waited, hidden among the rocky ridges. The first wave advanced confidently, unaware of the trap. Cade signaled, and Lyra struck first. She moved like a shadow, silent and precise, disabling the leading attackers before they realized the danger. Cade followed, cutting through the enemy with skill honed over years of battle. Together they became an unstoppable force, human and alien in perfect synchronization. The battle raged across the canyon. Cade noticed that Lyra not only anticipated his movements, but also coordinated attacks that he would not have attempted on his own. Her speed, intelligence, and precision gave them an advantage against overwhelming odds. During a particularly intense moment, a Droxian soldier lunged at Cade from behind. Lyra reacted instantly, intercepting him and knocking him to the ground. Cade turned just in time to strike down another attacker. Breathless and focused, he realized something he had never admitted. He could not have survived this without her. As the battle continued, Cade shouted, We're outnumbered! Focus on the rear flank! Lyra, cover me! Lyra moved like lightning, neutralizing enemies with unmatched skill. Cade's admiration for her had grown beyond respect. He felt a deep sense of trust, absolute trust, that she would not fail him. And in turn, Lyra trusted him, relying on his decisions, his instincts, and his strength. Hours passed, and slowly the tide began to turn. The Droxian marauders, unprepared for such coordinated resistance, began to retreat. Cade and Lyra pursued strategically, driving the remaining forces into the open desert where escape was impossible. Finally, the last attackers fled into the horizon, leaving the outpost safe. Cade and Lyra stood together on a rocky ridge, surveying the aftermath. Dust and smoke swirled around them, but victory was theirs. Cade exhaled deeply, lowering his sword. "We did it," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. I couldn't have imagined surviving this alone. Not today. Not ever." Lyra stepped closer, her expression calm but proud. Cade finally realized the truth he had been avoiding. She had been more than his companion, more than a silent observer. She had been his equal, his partner, and his protector. Cade turned to face her fully. "Lyra, I owe you my life. Not just today, but every day since I bought you. You've been listening, learning, watching, and you've saved me more times than I can count." Lyra's eyes softened. She had heard every word, every confession, every doubt he had spoken over the weeks. And now, the moment of acknowledgement had arrived. She had chosen not only to survive, but to stand beside him as an equal. Cade stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on hers. "I underestimated you," he admitted. "I thought I was rescuing someone weak, someone helpless. But you're stronger than anyone I've ever met, not just in battle, but in mind and heart." Lyra's faint smile grew, and for the first time, she allowed herself to speak a single word aloud. "Thank you." The sound was soft, barely above a whisper, but Cade heard it clearly. It was the first time she had spoken, and the weight of it carried 1,000 unspoken thoughts: trust, understanding, courage, and perhaps even friendship. Cade's eyes widened. "You spoke," he exclaimed. I thought you couldn't." Lyra shook her head gently. "I could hear all along," she said simply. "I chose to stay silent until I knew you would see me, not as property, not as a prize, but as me." Cade felt a rush of emotion he had not expected. Pride, relief, admiration, all mixed together. "I see you now," he said softly. "Not just what you can do, but who you are. And I am glad you're here. Glad I didn't stay alone." The bond between them, tested by battle and forged in trust, had reached its peak. They were no longer warrior and silent princess. They were equals, partners, and friends. The next days were quieter, filled with repair, reflection, and preparation. Cade and Lyra worked side by side, planning defenses, repairing the outpost, and strengthening their understanding of one another. The events of the battle had changed them, solidifying a trust that words alone could not convey. Visitors from nearby colonies arrived, hearing tales of the human warrior and the silent princess who had defeated the Droxian marauders. They came to witness the partnership that had become legendary. Cade and Lyra welcomed them, showing coordination, strength, and mutual respect that impressed all who watched. Cade realized something he had never admitted. He no longer felt the crushing weight of loneliness. Lyra's presence, her understanding, and her strength had filled a part of his life he had long thought empty. And Lyra, for her part, felt a freedom she had never known. She had been purchased, underestimated, and underestimated again. But with Cade, she had found recognition, respect, and partnership. One evening, as the twin moons rose and bathed the desert in silver light, Cade and Lyra stood together at the edge of a cliff, overlooking the vast sands. Cade placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. "We've faced impossible odds," he said. We've survived, we've learned, and we've grown. And I know whatever comes next, we can face it together." Lyra nodded, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. She had heard his every word, every unspoken feeling, and she had understood. Together they had proven that strength was not measured by solitude or brute force, but by trust, respect, and shared courage. Cade smiled, a rare, genuine smile that had not touched his face in years. "I thought I was alone," he whispered, "but I'm not. And thanks to you, I never will be again." Lyra returned the smile, stepping closer. "And I," she said softly, "am not alone either." As the night deepened and the desert winds calmed, warrior and princess stood side by side, ready for whatever the galaxy would send their way. Their partnership, forged in trust, battle, and understanding, was unbreakable. They had learned to listen, to understand, and to act as one, and in that unity they found strength beyond measure. The galaxy had underestimated them both, but together they were unstoppable.